Welcome to another episode of SJS Recommends. Today we are going to talk about Stalker from Andrei Tarkovsky, one of the greatest films ever made. It was his fifth feature-length film, and it's the second Tarkovsky film that we are doing on this podcast, as we did Nostalgia, I think a couple months ago. So Tarkovsky is actually the first director that has the honor of being twice in the podcast, although that's gonna change in a couple of weeks when we will have our second Koreeda film. So now we are at this moment in the podcast where directors are starting to appear again in the podcast, which is obviously quite a lot of fun. But yeah, as always, I will do a bit of an intro for this film. So it's an adaptation of a novel called Roadside Picnic from 1972, which was written by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. It's a fairly famous science fiction book, which I haven't read, but I probably will read it at some point. And I think I first watched Stalker back in 2018, and I've watched it 4 times now. I think the second watch was in 2020, then third watch was early last year when I actually showed it to one of my university friends, and we watched it together, and he liked it too, so that's good. And then now I watched it for the 4th time a couple days ago, and this is one of my absolute favorite films of all time. To me, it's Tarkovsky's best film, although all of his films are really amazing and could be put to the conversation of being his best film. And this is in the Sight and Sound top 100 list, and you usually see it in the critics list for greatest films of all time, and for a good reason. And yeah, it's like aesthetically a perfect movie, which we'll obviously get more into, and thematically a very dense film. And I think many people, of course, find it to be a very difficult film, but to me, it's actually in many ways quite accessible, as it's just so beautiful to look at. And some of the themes I think are fairly clear, but obviously there are so many different themes and points of view that you could analyze on this movie. So it will be hard to unpack in its entirety, but I think there are definitely some easier themes to tackle. And of course, this film and the Roadside Picnic book have been like very influential for many different art forms, whether it's literature, film, and even video games and music. And I think this is actually for a very difficult art house film. It's a fairly popular film, and I think like a very famous film, even though again, it's not accessible for your average viewer. But yeah, I think there's always this speculation that Tarkovsky actually maybe died because he made this film, because he got cancer from the location where they shot this film. Then he again died in the 80s. I don't actually know whether that's like speculation or whether it's kind of confirmed, but that's something that people talk about. Obviously, that's a honorable way to go, to die for your art, but I would have wished, of course, that Tarkovsky lived way longer, as he died fairly young, and he could have made many more films if he hadn't died. But yeah, an incredible film, and I would even make perhaps a slightly controversial take that to me this is even better than 2001: A Space Odyssey, and to me this is probably maybe the best science fiction film ever made, and perhaps the best slow cinema film ever made. And obviously Bellatar has taken lots of influence from this, for example. And one more thing, then I will shut up for a bit, is that obviously sometimes on my channel I talk about like what would be my top 10 Sight and Sound ballot. And I think Stalker would be definitely in my top 10 ballot. And then in terms of my favorites, obviously favorites is a bit different than greatest. This would probably be in top 25 favorites. Yeah. But anyway, now I will ask Altaz what he thought of this film, although I think he loved it because it's a Tarkovsky film and he has loved everything he has seen from Tarkovsky, so he probably loved it.
Yeah, you're right. I loved it. I think this film is a cinematic marvel. Uh, there's it's wholly unique and one of a kind experience, and it's absolute visual poetry. So I'm very much looking forward to discussing it, as it is a film, like you said, very it is accessible and it's very engaging, and it's yeah possibly the greatest science fiction movie ever made because of what it does with the genre, which we don't usually see in a certain convention of science fiction, and it's absolutely incredible. And on top of that, I do appreciate because I always admire people when they do great films from my birth year and stuff like that. So thank you for introducing me to this film, which is from my birth year of released in my birth year of 1979. Although, as we've discussed before, there are people with those views that say you can't say it's 79 because it was actually probably shot in 78, but whatever. we'll, we'll stay away from those debates and we'll just say it's 79.
Yeah, we are often very particular about art, but not quite that particular, so or obsessive. But yeah, whatever. One thing I actually forgot to mention in my intro is the plot synopsis. Although I think most people probably have either seen this or at least heard what it is about. But I'll just sum it up quickly. That it's about three people who go into this mysterious place called the Zone. So we have this scientist and then this writer, and then we have this guy who they call the Stalker, who is this guide who takes people to the Zone. So that's basically the plot. And yeah, so we can now talk about the film a bit, I guess, without spoilers, but not for long. I think this is a film that you need to talk about with the spoilers.
Yeah. Mhm.
So I think I don't know whether this would be a good entry point into Tarkovsky. I think probably quite many people start with this film as it is such a famous and popular film, and as it is often considered to be Tarkovsky's best film, although I think many people would say that Andrei Rublev is better. Some people would say Mirror is better because it's so kind of maybe the most personal and emotional film that Tarkovsky ever made. And then maybe some people would even say Solaris. But I've always thought that Stalker is the best thing he ever made, although I need to watch Andrei Rublev again as I've only seen it once. The rest I've watched more than once. And of course, there are people like Solitary Ronin who think that Ivan's Childhood is his best film. Although I don't guess he thinks it. Maybe it's not his best film, but he has it as his favorite. So, and I love Ivan's Childhood, and I think it's fairly underrated. But I think this later work is definitely more interesting overall.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like Ivan's childhood is a film that kind of shows that when someone is a genius, that their early work is already far surpasses so much cinema. So Ivan's childhood is that, but when you think of sophistication, I think yes, he gets way more sophisticated after that tune. And I love Ivan's childhood, so I'm not actually denigrating that film, but I'm just saying, yeah, complex. But what's interesting that I find about Tarkovsky is, I guess you got to just slowly, as my experience has been, you just kind of got to watch his films, and as you watch enough of his films, they reveal themselves more to you. So, um, yeah, this is now my fifth, I believe, film of his. So, by this point, I kind of understand, at least from my level, what his kind of explorations and interests are. Uh, but they don't. His films don't fail to blow me away every single time, like this one did. And I don't know how I would answer the question of what is his best film, because all the ones you've mentioned, I'm like, how do you decide? which is the best. But there is something really special about this film, which I'm hoping to discuss. And I just had a question. You said this was his fifth film, right? So Andrei Rublev was before this. Ivan's Childhood was before this. And what other two films were before this one? Was Solaris before this?
Solaris is 72 and Mirror is 75. So, and this is 79. So yeah,
Oh,
those
yeah.
were before. And
So
then
it's
after
like
this, Nostalgia and then Sacrifice.
yeah, and I'm also excited to, since we just watched Nostalgia and we discussed that. I think there's such an interesting mirroring between this film and that film. It's almost like they're having a conversation with each other.
Yeah.
So that adds a whole layer. But I think I'll let you start with the difficult question of who would you recommend this film to, or who do you expect would enjoy this film?
Yeah. Well, one more thing I'll say about Ivan's Childhood, then I answer your question, because I was just thinking about one of the Criterion Closet videos that came out a couple of months ago with Nuri Bilge Ceylan, and he actually said that he took Ivan's Childhood and he said that this is Tarkovsky when he didn't have style yet, or something like that. So he hadn't developed his style yet. Although I think Ivan's Childhood is an absolutely gorgeous looking film, but so to me it has definitely lots of style and it has some of his best shots. But I can kind of see what Ceylan is saying with that. And by the way, I'd recommend that video to everybody. It's one of my favorite closet videos, as he talks about Home and Bergman and all of my favorites, basically. So yeah, and then
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, yeah, please.
Yeah, I was just gonna answer your question. So I think this film is for people who love kind of hard sci-fi, who love intellectual sci-fi that makes you think about consciousness and religion and the world. So people like that, I think, would love it. And I think if you have read the book, you probably should watch the film. Although I think the film is very loose adaptation of the book, so they are probably very different. And I think if you have watched other Tarkovsky films and you've liked them, you would probably like this one. And probably, again, if you like Bergman and other art house filmmakers or slow cinema filmmakers, I think this one would be you. And also for the lovers of beautiful, like big pictures and like paintings, I think this would be one to watch, because it's one of the best looking films of all time, if not the best looking film of all time. So I think this would be like fairly accessible to various types of film fans, as long as you are someone who watches art house films, because obviously it will be a huge jump if you watch like a Avengers film or something like that, and then you go straight into Stalker. But I think this is a film that if you are into art house, you probably have this on your radar or have watched it already. But yeah, it's just one of the greatest films of all time, and I think it was actually surprisingly low in the Sight and Sound list. It was maybe in the top 60 or something, when I think it should be higher. I think in the Sight and Sound list, Mirror was the highest rated Tarkovsky, and then I think Andrei Rublev might have been higher than this. I don't actually remember. I think both Andrei Rublev and Stalker were in the top 100. But yeah, and I know that Andrei Rublev is obviously a very important film for you, because I think you talked about it in your 10 films that remade me video. So yeah, I really need to watch it again. I know there's like a 4K print on YouTube, so because I don't, that's actually one Tarkovsky film that I don't own. So yeah, I should watch it very soon again.
Yeah. When you're saying what Ceylan said, it's like it's like, not to denigrate again like Ivan's Childhood or that. It's that, I guess what he's trying to say is that, and what we're saying is that Ivan's Childhood is made in convention. You can see that as an early artist, it's quite normal that you start somewhere fixed with a fixed reference. So it's like conventional, but it's style within the convention. So 100% the striking visuals is introducing a sense of exploration of style and also seeing things you haven't seen. captured in that way. So it's like convention, and then he's adding this style, this flair to the convention that you don't see, and it's striking. And I feel like Rublev's like evolves within that tradition, even though Rublev, it's progressed and quite different from Ivan's childhood, but I still feel like there's some convention there. It's almost like a painter, and that's what I think is unique about Tarkovsky, is because very rarely you've seen painters that actually paint in different styles, right? There are certain periods, and whereas in here, it's almost like he's like going from like a classical or like, and then to like a modern style, and then it's like after Rublev, when you go to Solaris, Mirror, and by the time I haven't seen Mirrors, I've seen Solaris, and once you get to Stalker, it's like it's different. It's like it's abstract. So for me, if I would say who would I would recommend this to, first, people who are interested in just striking visuals and arresting visuals, like things where you want visually to experience, something so different that it puts you in a state of wonder, or of almost taking you outside of yourself. And previous Tarkovsky films do that as well. Andrei Rublev does it, Solaris does it, but this is like, it's arresting. It's just the way the film is pictured. So if you're interested in striking visuals, arresting visuals, things that could literally take your breath away, things that are very curious, that they put you in a state of wonder, what is going on, and engage you that way, I would definitely recommend this film for you. And if you want to see an example where aesthetic becomes the subject matter and the medium and the story, that is a unique thing that great auteurs that we discuss and we love, like Tarkovsky or Ozu, they have this ability where it's like the aesthetic and the themes, the medium, the subject matter, even the story, all are one thing, and it's absolutely profound. So I would recommend it to anyone who likes things that are challenging, who want to go outside the box. They want to see what the limits are of this particular medium, or people who test those limits, or people who just blow your mind away with something so unique that you feel like, I've never seen this before, and I don't know if I'll see it again, that kind of thing. I'd recommend this film.
Yeah, I completely agree. You summarized that really well. But one more thing I'll say about Ivan's childhood, and then we can go into the spoiler-filled discussion. So Ivan's childhood is actually my top 10 war films of all time, and I think it's a 5-star movie. So again, don't want to denigrate it or anything. So I've watched that like 3 times, and I actually showed that film to the same friend that I showed Stalker, but he didn't like Ivan's childhood, but he liked Stalker. So that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. That is interesting.
But yeah, Ivan's childhood has like one of my favorite like visual sequences of all time near the end, when they are in the boat going into water, and there are trees. Like, that's absolutely stunning. That's like Night of the Hunter level of black and white kind of cinematography that even reminds you a bit of like the German expressionist and things like that. But yeah. So now we get into spoilers. Although again, I think this is a film that I wouldn't care that much about spoilers if I hadn't seen this, because it's more about the aesthetic, the vibe, and the themes rather than what's actually happening there. Although what happens in the film informs the themes, of course, and stuff, but I wouldn't care that much. But again, I know people just are so obsessive about spoilers. I don't want to hear anything. Again, I think I'm very different in that way, that I don't really care. Other than obviously if you watch something like Game of Thrones or something like that, then you don't want to hear about the Red Wedding or something like that. But I think with these art house films, the plot doesn't matter that much in the end to me. So, but each to our own. But yeah, let's talk about the aesthetic first. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about with the aesthetic. So I'll start with the basic first, that obviously this film is divided into kind of two different styles, you could say. So we have the sepia tone scenes, which are absolutely stunning. And funnily enough, actually, the next film that we are going to talk about also has sepia. I actually didn't realize when I put these films together that they both have that, but funny coincidences always with these. But then it also has those color scenes, and we often see in this film that when they get to the zone, most of that is in color, but before that it's all in sepia tone. But there are like scenes in sepia tone in the zone as well, I think so. And then in the end, it kind of, the end it goes back to sepia as well. But I think both the sepia and the color shots are incredibly beautiful, and the shots are, every single shot in this film is basically absolutely perfect, like how he chose the angle and how he shoots all the like small objects, like even like small rocks and the water and the weeds and all the kind of trash that is in the zone that we see in the water, like a old pistol and some like all kinds of trash and everything like that. It all like how he shoots it looks incredible. Or in the sepia tone in the beginning when he shoots through the door, and there are these very slow zooms and stuff that are just absolutely incredible. Like I think this is Tarkovsky's best looking film, and that's saying a lot because most of his films look like some of the best looking films of all time. And I think Tarkovsky, even if you don't care about the subject matter and stuff, you can just watch them for the aesthetic.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's he's credited as the art director as well, and that's unique as well because as much as we always praise many directors, they have collaborators, especially in the cinematography and art direction or set direction. So him being credited as the art director, I think that was significant because if you look at the art direction of the film, it's absolutely mind blowing, and you're completely right. Like whether you are looking at the decision between employing the sepia tone and then the impact it has when it's like full color, but exactly like what you said, how they're capturing certain images. So certain images could be just photographs, and each would be an amazing photograph to just stare at a wall because of the symbolism and how it's moving you as a person and the messaging that it creates. And then comes also the framing and the camera movement, which, you know, even in nostalgia, it's like he has everyone he works with, like in terms of what they do in terms of framing and camera movement, especially that first scene where they're in the bed and it's going to the child and then the mother, and the mother is, you know, facing Stalker, and then how it like comes back, and then there's the train passing, and then the glass of water, you know, moving down. It just puts you in a state of mind. It's like it's one of that's part of the aesthetic achievement as well, is that he creates a state of mind in any of his films. He immediately knew how to put his audience into a state of mind, and then when you're in that state of mind, and then the exploration unfolds. I don't even necessarily think of his things as stories, his films, but explorations. It takes you into a state of mind, and then it's like the exploration. You go on this exploration, and the arresting visuals just keep you locked, and they have so much poetic value as well.
Yeah, the visuals at the same time feel very controlled and methodical, but also kind of free and very natural. And they create this very hypnotic atmosphere again with the slow zooms and the very slow methodical camera movement and again the color grading and everything like that. It's just yeah. It's every time I watch it, it just really blows me away. And this was, by the way, a film again I've seen it 4 times. That I loved it on my first watch, and I still love it. So it gets better and better every time you watch it. Although I did this kind of crazy triple bill when I watched this, like on Friday, that I watched this Japanese film called Iretsumi. Then I watched the Special Day, and then I watched the Stalker. so 3 films in a row basically. So I was quite like tired and bit out of it when I watched Stalker this time, as I had watched 2 films before it. So as it is such a dense and long movie, obviously. But I
Same. I
remember,
had a. No, go ahead, please.
yeah, I was gonna say one more thing, that last year when I watched it with that friend, we both kind of agreed that even though it's a very long movie, very slow movie, that it actually doesn't feel that long when you kind of just get in the zone with it. Again, not the zone of the movie, but you
Yeah,
get in
this
the
is.
zone with the film, and when you're hypnotized by it, it actually feels like time is going fairly quickly. So, and it has that kind of calming effect. So, yeah.
You're right. It actually doesn't feel the length it is. Uh, yeah, you're just transported, and I even notice in nostalgia, there's just this way that it's not maybe physical possibility to really bend time, or can we actually bend time, because he does bend time in his cinema, like you said, because once you're in that, the zone, as we call it, not the zone in the film, it's like a trance, and you don't actually know, you're not aware of time anymore, and you're surprised by how fast the movie actually moves, given that it is a piece of slow cinema, as it's categorized. So that is an um, yeah, incredible achievement of the film as well. And it's like you said, it's like it's an achievement that it's like when you're watching it, you're like, oh, it hasn't been equaled. Like, there's no equal to something like Stalker. It's just one of a kind, and then yeah, all the discussions you can have as a result.
And now we could slowly move into the themes, although I think we will still refer back to the aesthetic, as the aesthetic kind of reveals some of the themes at certain points of the movie. And again, you mentioned nostalgia earlier. Like both of these films have water in them, and we can kind of speculate like what the water means. I have some thoughts about that, although I think I kind of said the same thing in the nostalgia discussion, but we'll see. But I think what I'll start the thematic analysis with is that when you read negative reviews about this film, again, the people always say that I didn't get the film, I didn't understand what it has to say, so I hated the film. And like I always say on my channel, I absolutely despise that type of
Mm.
way of seeing art, that if I don't get it, it must be awful. It must be so bad because I didn't understand it. Like I didn't understand this film when I first watched it, but I still loved it. And to be honest, even though it feels like a very dense film, like I said in the beginning, I think there are definitely certain themes that aren't that difficult about it and that are very clear if you, for example, see the final shot of the film and see what when the stalker is crying near the end and what he's talking about. Like that's one of the themes, for example.
Mm. Yeah, I guess the visuals, because they were so captivating to me, as you said, the water. So the theme that first really captivated me, that I could see in terms of the imagery, is actually goes back to mythology. The idea of the primordial force and the primordial life force. And in this film, it's like it's represented by water to a certain extent, but it's also corrupted. Like, so it's where you see water in different contexts, and it's the same thing in nostalgia as well. So here it's like water, these pools, and that there's water that they look like this primordial life force, and you see this light and dark as well. And then the dark is most likely industrial oil or something, because I believe my wife told me they shot this at a abandoned hydroelectric uh, plants in like Estonia and stuff like that. And so you have kind of this industrial liquid, which is like this darkness to the lightness and the purity that water has, this nice visual contrast. And then often underneath you see all this, what is a wasteland, an industrial wasteland, all this like metal and industrial uh, rubbish just layered all under there, and this sludge and all that. And to me, it's like this primordial force, purity, nature, but then the corruption of that, from like a soul level to a very material level. So it has a very like environmental message, but it also has a very spiritual message. So that's some of the like, the themes that kind of start evolving in this exploration. Of course, there's many, much more.
Yeah, I'll return to the water just in a bit, but I think one thing that's important to establish in the beginning of the thematic discussion is that the three different characters all represent different types of views.
Mm.
So we have the scientist,
Mm.
who is in the believer, we have the artist, the writer, who has his own idea of the world, and then we have the stalker, who is obviously a very religious person who has faith. And I mentioned the scene where he's crying. He, of course, is crying about that. Again, these two men that he was with, that they don't believe. And why don't people believe? He's so sad that
Mm.
other people see the world and the zone differently than he does. But now I'll go back to the water, because there's this one shot where one of the characters is laying on the ground, and then like next to his head we see the flowing water.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like his stream of consciousness in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And when I talked about nostalgia, I think I talking about how the water is kind of like the stream of consciousness. And this film is obviously all about consciousness and also the unconscious part of your brain. Because they go to the zone and they think like, what do I really want? Like the artist, I think, says that my conscience says that I want to be a vegetarian, but then my unconscious
Mm-hmm.
says that I want to eat an air fried steak like Jordan Peterson would. But so that's kind of that line reveals some of the themes of the film, which is the unconscious and the conscious, and how they are clashing with each other, and how your desires, the conscious ones and the unconscious ones, can be very different. And I think we talked about some of these types of themes in the heroic purgatory discussion as well a couple of weeks ago. So this is like a very psychoanalytical film, and you could analyze it from that lens for hours and hours.
Yes, I mean, when I was watching it, I did think of exactly that, how your commentary on the water and the conscious and the subconscious for nostalgia, and I was like, oh, I can see it here, uh, even more pronounced, like you said, because even the end point, there's this place that they're supposedly trying to go, the room. What is the room? We can keep discussing more, but one thing of the room is maybe it's a place that reveals absolute truth, or it reveals the truth, the deepest truth within each human being, or maybe human beings as a whole. And that is very much tied to the subconscious, and it's very much tied to, do we really know what drives us? Do we really know what we want? Do we really know what we are searching for? And that theme layers on really well with what we're talking about, the primordial mass, the industrial wasteland, and all this imagery you're seeing, because you are seeing this human corruption. To be honest, it's like, this is, it's not misanthropic. I don't think Tarkovsky's ever misanthropic. I think he's always in somewhat hopeful or cautioning, and I think he's in his most cautioning mode in this film, to the point where I do feel it's much darker. I do feel it's quite scary, of a film in a way, because of that reason. But he's at his most cautioning, because you have this, like you said, there you have this range of responses, right? From the literal, the scientist, to the writer that kind of connects to, I guess, the art world. But Stalker, interesting that you say religious. Yes, I think so. Yes, he's a religious figure, but he's also maybe a figure for art as well, because art and religion in a way have roots, not dogmatic religion, but I mean spiritual aspect, is about the unknown, the abstract, transcending, trying to understand your own, uh, what's deep in our nature, even confronting things in their nature, uh, appreciating beauty. So Stalker is an interesting thing because I thought, three things that we would ask or try to explore during our chat too would be like, what's the zone, what's the room, and who is Stalker? Because these three things kept the whole time. You're like, what's the zone, what's the room, and who is Stalker? Because they're really important to the actual exploration, and they don't actually have answers, I don't think. That's what makes it such an amazing film.
So I'll give some context before I answer some of the things that you mentioned. So I was kind of lucky last year when I watched it for the third time, as it was during the time when I took the psychoanalysis class at the university with a leading scholar in Finland. So we had been exploring some of these themes on the classes, and then I watched this film. So I was kind of prone to look at it from that perspective. And I was just thinking that, again, with the heroic purgatory, we were talking about the idea of narcissism, and this actually relates to some of the points that you were making about human corruption, as we see that all of these three people are kind of very narcissistic, and they are very rigid in their way of thinking, and they think about their own ideas, and they don't really care what the other people think and what they are doing to the zone and things like that. And then you were again asking what is the zone, what is the stalker, and things like that. So I think that to me the zone is the unconscious part of your brain, and the kind of they are walking through the zone, and it's all very mysterious, and they don't really know what is what and things like that, and will they get their wishes granted and things like that. So I think it's kind of the unconscious part of your brain. But the stalker again is the character that has faith in the zone. He's the person who believes that there is something more out there than just reason and normal reality. And yeah. And then you were also mentioning that again the stalker, that he's sad about the fact that about secular society and religion and stuff like that, but then also the art point that maybe we could think about how I can relate to his character in the way that I often of course talk in my channel how I'm so sad in this world when most people don't care about art, and they rather watch TikTok videos for 3 hours rather than reading a book or listening to Chopin or watching Stalker. So I can really relate to that character in that way, even though I cannot relate to the religious part as much as I think the society would be better if there were more people like the scientists that don't care about religion. But I can always kind of see these different points of view and relate to them in this kind of quote-unquote indirect way that I don't relate to the obvious religious stuff. But when you twist the idea a little bit and start talking about art, then I can relate to him. And of course, we can also relate to it in a way that kind of like we talked with Heroic Purgatory, that every person has a view how to make the world a better place, and I have that. But I can see with other people that they don't have the same view. So you get sad that, the world won't be like the image you have in your head. And then you start getting really sad and kind of crushed when you know that, people, the society are very different than what you would want them to be.
You said something last time when we were talking about heroic purgatory, right? And you were like, we still don't know kind of the root of consciousness and how it works. So the zone is this abstract concept in a way, because it's consciousness and then it's reality. But since we are all consciousness in a sense, what is reality? And since conscious will or subconscious will can transform material reality to the extent that we know material reality is there. So obviously this is getting very abstract, and I apologize to anyone listening to this thinking, okay, this is absolutely abstract, what are you talking about? But I do feel that that's at the heart of the film, because the idea is to change reality, but the film is playing with the idea of reality by going between sepia and color, and even his wife in the beginning saying, don't go, like, stop being a stalker, and then stop going there and stop going to the zone and you'll get arrested again, and all this kind of stuff. And he's jumping, so he's jumping realms. But is he jumping realms physically? Is he jumping realms emotionally? Is he jumping realms in his consciousness? So it's this weird space of the material and the immaterial, and yet the immaterial can move the material. So that's one of the things. I don't think the zone is exclusively one thing, because the zone could, in a very, if you want to look at it in a very surface way, you could say the zone is Earth, because it's talking about going home and all that kind of stuff. But Earth is not exactly home in some ways either. It can't be the final destination, right? Because you almost leave, your spirit leaves it at some point, if you're looking at a spiritual lens. And the stalker is so many things. But one interesting thing I do think the stalker does represent is that I do feel he has the elements of a Jesus Christ type figure. And I hope I'm talking about Jesus Christ in a respectful way, because the point is not to be disrespectful in any sort of way. But it is this, he is a bit of a martyr, right? He doesn't go to the room, but he's there to, like, lead people to the room so they can go and try to discover what's within, what drives them, what's truth, what's reality, at least about themselves, because knowing yourself is actually knowing reality, which I 100% agree with Tarkovsky there. Knowing thyself is actually knowing reality, because we're all reality creators in a way, and then individually as a society. But he himself does not go into the room that would reveal that. So I'm not saying it's exclusively religious, but that's what I love about Tarkovsky, is whether you go from Andrei Rublev all the way, like, Nostalgia, he believes in spirituality. I feel he's a highly spiritual filmmaker, but he's not a religious per se filmmaker, though he uses so much religious iconography everywhere to represent the spirit, or to represent maybe our failure with what could be an avenue of searching for the spirit, or that. And then obviously there's that whole stuff about music too that could relate into, but I don't want to go on for too long without having more of your thoughts.
Yeah, he's definitely very spiritual filmmaker, and I think in reality, like in his real life, he was also very devout Christian, if I'm not mistaken. So his spirituality isn't just spirituality, so it kind of relates to also his actual
Okay.
Christian faith, I think. But the fun thing about talking about these films is that you have kind of million ideas going in your head at the same time. But I actually was starting to think about another philosophy class I took last year, which was about the philosophy of mind and phenomenology, which is, to sum it up briefly, it's about kind of like a study of perception and how people perceive things, and consciousness and unconsciousness. So I think this film, like you also kind of alluded to, is about different perceptions of reality. All these characters perceive reality in different ways, so we don't actually know whether the zone is just a regular place in Earth or whether it's something special. It depends on how these people perceive it. Obviously, the stalker perceives it in a way that it's a very special way, but then the scientist and the writer are more skeptical about it. And as we perceive the world and other people and everything in different ways. We never have kind of full touch with we aren't in a full touch with reality ever, as it's just our perception that dilutes the reality in a way. So like when you start talking about the film, like with these terms, it like becomes such a dense and difficult work to grapple with.
Yeah, it does, and it is, and I think that is the amazing thing, that something like that, like you said, can set off a million thoughts of all different level, all kinds of complexity while you're watching it, and how someone can do that with what is just a camera, image, story, color, lighting, and all that. Um, and I really appreciate you, actually, because I always felt that, yeah, I saw the spiritual. I wasn't always sure about the religious, but I definitely knew it played a part there. And I think for me, that's why also Tarkovsky's an important filmmaker for me, or speaks like very deeply to me, is I feel like his struggles are ones that I can relate to, that I have in my life, and the questions I have, because I am spiritually oriented. I think religion can be important when you're looking at, let's say, what we always talk about, the positive aspects, because religion itself can be complex. But since you mentioned his Christianity and all that, I see a lot of Dante in his films. When I saw it in Nostalgia, I saw it here. This whole, you have to go into the darkness to kind of uh, to transcend it. You have to go down to go up. So there's all these imagery, like when they're going through that tunnel. I guess it's a sewer, and I mean, that's, to me, it's just, there's certain imagery that makes your skin crawl when they're like getting in the water, and it's sludgy water, and they're just going through this, what is it, sewer, or is this tunnel or something, to remove refuse, like, and they're walking through it, and they're walking alone and all that. These are very um, faith-based symbols. That idea that you're walking alone, but you're actually walking with God, or you're walking with a guide. There's something to guide you, but your journey is still alone. You must peer into the things. You must confront these things. You must confront the darker parts of your soul, or your inclinations, or your human inclinations. And so that's all there, and it's just so profound, and it's so beautiful, and it's so scary at times, but it's so moving as well, like you said, where he's just tearing up by the water, and he's just lying down, and even the responses his wife is, it's just absolutely, his films are so moving and stirring, and you can't, every time you finish one of a Tarkovsky film, you're left in a state for like days, um, reflecting on all this.
And I think Tony always talks about the importance of spirituality, even though he's an atheist as
Mm.
well. So the spirituality then is a bit different. And I was just thinking about kind of, we have all these like objects in the zone. And if we think that the zone is the conscious or the unconscious, it's kind of like a minefield of memories or objects, in the way
Mm.
that kind of, when you think about the objects, maybe they are kind of like the memories of the characters. So the weapons would kind of represent maybe World War II or
Mm.
something like that. And many of the objects of something else, like for example the Industrial Revolution, when we have all these kind of
Mm-hmm.
objects, and also like how the Soviet Union obviously developed a lot during the 20th century, from this very underdeveloped, very poor country to something bigger when they have the battle with the US and
Mm-hmm.
stuff, and their economy grew a lot and things like that. So maybe it's actually these objects, maybe they really aren't in the ground, but they are just like memories of these other things, and things that represent certain things in the Soviet Union and in the world in general.
Yeah, and human consciousness, because like, how he uses that imagery of the nut, just a very nuts and bolts, just using the nut and on a string, and you use this to throw. It's like all these things came from the human consciousness and the human mind. So either individually or collectively, because like you said, it's like individual memories, but also collective memories. Industrialization is almost world collective memory now, um, even at that point. Or the wars are a kind of a collective memory because they indirectly involve the whole world in one way or another. And then all that coming from consciousness. And then I think he obviously Stalker is trying to push it further and saying there is an abstract. Let's take it all together. Obviously, if you have religion, you have art, you have science, and all that, and then there's something above that, and that's the spiritual aspect starting to come in, the abstract, right? Because if you believe very literally, if you say, okay, it's God, and God is the source of that, and God is ultimate consciousness, well, that nut that you used, created with a bolt, to use and construct things, are coming from that energy. So it creates this really profound notion when you start mixing the material with the abstract. And I think at a very basic level, he's trying to create a collision of the material and the abstract, and he's having them confront themselves. Um,
Yeah, that's how we can also see how the visuals of the movie really become substance and how important the aesthetic is in this movie because there's so much symbolism, like I talked, how the minefield of memories or whatever, and then earlier I mentioned the scene where we have one of the characters laying down and we have the water streaming, and it's kind of like the consciousness and the weeds
mhm,
in the water really add to it because when the weeds are kind of moving, kind of like with the wind and the water, it makes it seem like it's flowing like a stream of consciousness. So it
mhm,
gives more evidence to that theory that it's all about consciousness. And this isn't my original point, but I was reading a bit of the Wikipedia article for this film before we started, and I think they mentioned the word gulag in there, that maybe this film is
mm,
kind of referencing back to the gulags, and it's kind of trying to tackle and deal with the dark past, with the gulags and stuff in the Soviet Union and all that oppression and things like that. And of course, we can kind of see in this film where everything is kind of like feels like in a way a prison
mhm,
and stuff. So I think that kind of gives some evidence to that analysis. And I think it's very important to mention the ending of the film where we see the young kid and the table, and then the table is starting to move
mhm,
with her kind of power of mind. So that kind of
mhm,
relates to the idea of having faith and that there is more to this world than just reason and objects that we can perceive, that there is supernatural and maybe there is the divine or something like that, and maybe the zone is really powerful and can affect these things supernaturally and in a way. And I think in earlier when I was saying that some of the themes in this film are very obvious, like this was one of the shots I was referencing there because it very clearly kind of makes a point, that shot, especially after before that we see the stalker crying and crying about people not having faith, and then we see this moment when
mhm,
she's moving the objects with her mind. So it kind of makes a very clear point. So I think it would be hard to watch this film and not at least see this theme of the film. Yeah.
yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Like that, you, that theme is very much there, and the gulag point you make also, yeah, adds another layer, because definitely, where there's this constant, you're going to end up in prison again, you're going to end up in prison again, and obviously, in a communist system, religion was to be eradicated. It was opiate for the masses. You're not supposed to have it. So if you're standing up for religion or spirituality, um, in a material, almost like a very material system, because it is a conflict of two material systems at that time, right? Capitalism is a material system, and so is communism. Yes, it's for meant communism. The ideal is to, okay, greater good, or everyone, no one is kind of left behind, and you don't have these vast disparities and all that kind of stuff, and empowerment. But at the end of the day, we're talking about very material systems. I won't even say earthly per se, that are in conflict. So to speak out in that system would risk being put in a gulag, and all that. So that's definitely there. But like you said, the prison imagery can be that, but the prison imagery can be just the prison of your own consciousness if you're just tuning only into straight materialism and you're not appealing to anything greater. I also think it's interesting you mentioned with the child, very powerful, like end scene, um, and yet the child is referred to as a mutant. So I think that's a little bit interesting too, because apparently she can't walk, and she's a mutant, but then she has this power. So you're right. I mean, this could go back to the power of the consciousness again. She can't walk and all that stuff, but she doesn't have to. With her mind, uh, she can make forces move, which symbolically is also true of industrialization. In a way, you did take the forces of nature through applying your consciousness, and you made them move, uh, and do all kinds of things. Um, but also, like you said, with the water going around, and I think, uh, in nostalgia in this film, it's not what I didn't feel personally. That's water as one thing. You always have to look at the quality the water is in. There are stagnant pools of water that have been corrupted, and then there's fresh water. I think that scene, you're seeing fresh water go around. That could be a refreshing. That could be the pure water, not the one that's stagnated or one that's been corrupted. There's also a scene where you're sitting there and they're in water, but rain starts falling, and there creates a refreshing kind of feeling, like a cleansing kind of feeling. I remember that from nostalgia as well. There are different types of water, different qualities of water, different states of water, and then also how he talks about hardness versus softness. Like the harder you are, you die. The softer you are, you're alive. And water is always kind of soft, right? Rock is hard. So the water and rocks, like you said, the way he pictures the symbolism, that's there too. So I mean, there's just too much there, in that film.
Yeah, and you mentioned the room earlier. And okay, when they enter the room, the building, there's this kind of sand. They are kind of like dunes in a way that it goes like this a bit like.
Yeah,
So I think that's almost like stream of consciousness and in a way as well, like how
yeah,
that is shot and that there's like very powerful visual symbolism. And when they are in the room, they still keep shooting water and there are objects in the water. So the same kind of visual theme continues when they enter the room. And of course, they just sit around in the room for quite a while, but it's quite ambiguous what the room in the end is. Because to me, it just feels like thematically like very similar to the zone in general. That it's about the consciousness, unconsciousness, your desires, and things like that.
yeah. And I think it also relates to, one thing, that your channel and what you are opposing a bit, ignorance, right? That ignorance of bliss. I'd rather not know. Um, and so that's why I feel like this film is the most cautionary, because it's like, look at what you're doing, look at where we are, look at where you're going. If you don't try to search for that truth or understand it, what do you hope to do? I think from this to nostalgia, there is a down tone, right? It is a world, like you said, it's a decadent world, or it's a world in decay, or it's a world lost, or it's a world corrupted, or it's a world falling almost. Um, And how do you come back from this? I think there's a deep yearning in both these films.
Yeah, and I think when you think about consciousness and unconsciousness, like when you think, like, I'm losing my train of thought here with but like, how do you say? God, I'm completely losing my train of thought. I was gonna
That's
make
okay.
some.
Take your time. Take your time.
Yeah, I will cut this out of the chat. Yeah,
No, it's fine.
like what was I thinking? Like, God, like. Oh yeah, now I remember. So yeah, I'll cut that out. But so when you think about unconsciousness and consciousness, and you just talked about ignorance, so of course there are certain forms of ignorance that we can fight within ourselves. So the ignorant part of our consciousness, but then there is the unconscious, and obviously we are ignorant to our unconscious part of our brain. So we will always be a bit ignorant because we don't have the full capacity of our consciousness and our brain to understand the world and understand ourselves. And I think, like you talked about yearning as well, that I can see it in many Tarkovsky films that he has yearning for a more spiritual society that believes in art, that believes in things that aren't just concrete and rational and reasonable, but he wants something whimsical, something majestic, something that's not just a boring reality. And he has a deep yearning for that, and I can really relate to that in many ways. And I think many of us art lovers can really relate to that.
Yeah, you can see it in a lot of the films. Like he likes, like, it's amazing because he picturizes industrial. Sometimes, like in this film especially, like very industrial, very material, very mundane in a way, very boring. Like, a bunch of metal and water, and he does it in a transcendental way, like making it almost beautiful. And you're like, yeah, it just makes you wonder about the person, and like you said, like the yearning, like what he was clearly struggling, and I guess sometimes frustrated, sometimes hopeful, sometimes lost, and you can see all that very human internal struggle. But clearly he had a belief, or at least to me it seems that he had a belief that some kind of thing closer to perfect knowledge was possible. And that's kind of like The Room and Stalker. Like there is a guide, there's a potential guide. What in it's Stalker, but Stalker, like you said, like I could say, yes, it's a Jesus Christ type figure, but Stalker is also a figure that's talking about music and how it I don't know if it was Stalker's talking about music, but I know there's that whole discussion about music and how music doesn't have an exact purpose, but it's so important, and all this. So I think that there is a way to perfect knowledge. I think in this conception, he doesn't believe there's no. I think he knows there's a way, but maybe we are distracted by all these things, by war, by industry, by simply the material, and even by science itself. Um, and we're kind of distracted, and we're not looking for that greater truth or knowledge. We're just getting stuck in movements and specific ideas. And like you said, maybe all that is also tied to a sense of ego. It's a lot of ego driving it, and then we get back into the psychoanalytical between the ego and the superego and the conflicts and all these kinds of things. So it's a very layered exploration.
Yeah, I think in both Stalker and Nostalgia, these are kind of introspective works in a way where he's trying to kind of struggle through his own like contradictions in his thinking, and like he struggles with his national identity, how he loves Russia in a way, and what it stands for in many ways, but then he also has many problems with it, and of course he was exiled in the end. And we talked in the Nostalgia chat that yeah, he has that nostalgia for Russia, but he was exiled from there, so there's lots of this struggle and contradiction and conflict in there. So he's really kind of looking at his own thought processes with these films and trying to understand them through certain forms of kind of abstraction and trying to make these things bigger and kind of more outside of himself, even though they are very much of his own mind. So he kind of combines internal and external factors in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's like perfect for conflicted people.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's what's the greatest thing about that. It's like if you're conflicted, you kind of find some solace in these explorations because they're not. Yeah, they make you process your conflicts.
And of course, in philosophy, we often think about this, that like does a philosopher have a consistent set of beliefs, or are there contradictions in his work? But of course, we know that humans aren't intelligent enough to not have any contradictions. Every single person has some contradictions, no matter how logical you are and no matter how much you think these things through. There are some contradictions in your mind, both in your reasoning but also emotionally. And then there's the contradiction between your conscious and unconscious, and the desires are very different and they are in conflict in many ways. And it will be very interesting whether like humans will ever find out through science that like what consciousness and unconsciousness actually are. Like when you maybe in the future you have some kind of machine that can look through that, but who knows, maybe it might be a mystery until the end of the world. But yeah, but I think these themes are maybe a good way to start like wrapping this chat up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can wrap up. Yeah, what a film. Sometimes we're discussing this and I'm like, it doesn't sound like we're discussing a film, right? Because it's not the usual, oh yeah, well, this happened or that happened, and oh, this is the story and this is what happened. It's so something totally different. Yet it doesn't also has a narrative, and you can follow that narrative and the exploration, but it's all woven into the larger picture. And as we started discussing from the very beginning, the aesthetic and the subject matter and the medium and the themes and the visuals all being one.
And of course, we will return back to Tarkovsky, although now that I have planned the schedule for the rest of the year, it won't be this year, but maybe early next year. And I think the next one will be Mirror, and then The Sacrifice will be the last one. But yeah. We'll see how it goes. But like I just said, you can find the schedule for the rest of the year down below. Yeah, I really enjoyed this chat. I think it went well, even though obviously it's a very dense film and you could talk about it more and more. But I'm glad that Altaz enjoyed the film. I mean, I knew he was gonna like it before he watched it. But yeah, great film, and one that I will definitely return to many times in the future. And it is a bucket list item for me to someday see this one in the cinema. So.
Oh yeah, this would be great in the cinema. Yes.
And I think there should be opportunities for that, as it is such a popular film for art house films. So I think it's probably shown quite often. And I think the Finnish art house community also loves Tarkovsky, as in Finland we often, I think, in the arts, like lots of Russian stuff, even though we have a very conflicting relationship with Russia due to our history with World War II and before that. So, but I think like many people here who like classic literature, for example, really love Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, and then with films, Tarkovsky. So.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, and one thing I'll mention, that if you look at the schedule, we have another Russian film coming up called Letter Never Sent. Like I think it's like a few months away, but I think that's a film that's perfect for Tarkovsky fans. And that film is usually, I think Altaz has it on Criterion Blu-ray, but it's also always available in great quality on YouTube, so it's easy to access for people. So I would highly recommend that film for people. So really looking forward to watching that for the third time for the podcast fairly soon.
Yeah, I'm excited to watch that as well.
Yeah. But anyway, let us know what you think of Stalker or Tarkovsky or whatever else in cinema. And yeah, next episode will be about a special day, which has like little similarities to this film, but not that much. But anyway, thanks for watching. Don't drink Coke at all. Sayonara and arigato gozaimashita.